Well, it's a pleasure for us to be here today. This is one of those topics that I think is really, I guess, novel and it's impacting everybody's lives in many different ways. So before we get started, I just wanted to tell you a bit more about myself and my background and let my colleague Brandon here introduce himself as well. I'm Andy Ogawa. I've been in the Department of Information Computer Sciences about 15 years, and boy, have we seen a lot of technological advances and changes in that time frame, which we're going to cover in just a little bit. So before we get started, Brandon, would you introduce yourself?
So as Dr. Ogawa said, I'm Brandon Ogata, currently a PhD student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, doing some research with Dr. Ogawa.
Okay, thank you very much, Brandon. So I know everyone here is excited to get started. So why don't we all get started with AI for educators? Okay, so with that in mind, the first thing we need to highlight is that over the past maybe about 30 years, we have seen about four very big technological booms that basically changed society. And basically, I think you saw a lot of money shifting hands in these particular cases. We're going to see, early 90s World Wide Web. Do you all remember Netscape Communicator? Or is that just me and my my gray hair that I'm glad Zoom makes it look a little bit blacker? It might be just me. But this really changed how we got access to information. We also have social media, right? Whenever everyone jumped on the MySpace craze into Facebook, which is still here today with TikTok, etc. Anyone here was on MySpace and had their friend Tom, right? That's like everybody's friend. We also had this iPhone, which really changed the game with the mobile apps, as I mentioned briefly earlier. In this case, what really was amazing about the idea of mobile apps was how much it leveraged and changed our economy, where a lot of folks really got to think about what we call the gig economy and how a lot of folks are taking jobs nowadays, where the launch of companies like Uber and Lyft really changed the mobile game and how much people were really getting into mobile apps development. That was really an amazing time there in the late 2000s, 2010s. However, we saw technology kind of stabilize for a bit until we got to 2022 and looked at generative AI. Where in late 2022, the company OpenAI released ChatGPT, which utterly changed the world in terms of how we consider the idea of creation of content, because a lot of people can ask questions and get humanistic responses to them. Okay, so this coffee talk today is going to really be focusing on the idea of generative AI and really how it impacts all of us, both in society and as educators, very importantly in that facet. So to get us started, we want to highlight our main 5 points today, okay? Because everyone wants to know, hey, where are we going with this? So we have 5 major points. They're going to be, what is AI? We got to get that back before we get started. We also need to know, what are GPT, right? Because we heard about the term chat GPT, but we don't necessarily know what it all stands for. We know what the word chat is, but not necessarily GPT. So we'll break that down for you. We also want to look at how generative AI like ChatGPT really does have a major impact on the workforce and what's happening on that global scale, followed by how it's actually influencing education. And at the end of the day, we want everyone to get a hands-on opportunity. Okay, so you can see these major topics here are really helping us to look at the wide audience we have with us today, for those who are novices to those who have worked with a good deal, and we're trying to cater to everyone here. Okay. So to get into it in more detail, we want to start with what is artificial intelligence. So Brandon, would you like to kind of take the reins here?
Right. So as Dr. Ogawa said, our first question is, what is artificial intelligence? And there are many different definitions of this term. However, for this presentation, we'll start with the definition that you see here. Essentially, we'll treat artificial intelligence as the process of creating machines that behave intelligently, particularly focusing on the software or programming side of things. So this does require understanding human intelligence, but it's not just in observable manners. You can think of it in some regards as being like a box that you provide inputs to and get outputs out of without necessarily understanding how everything works inside. So one way of examining artificial intelligence classically is the Turing test, where you would have a human who is asking questions via text through chat without knowing who is responding to those questions. And it could be a human or it could be a machine. If the machine can produce responses that cannot be differentiated from human responses, then it is behaving in a manner equivalent to a human and maybe said to have human-like intelligence according to Turing. So Now, looking at a more specific type of artificial intelligence, GPT, as Dr. Ogawa said, this is most commonly referred to as, most commonly known or nowadays as ChatGPT, though there are other types. And we're going to focus on the GPT part of ChatGPT. So GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. It's generative in that it can create new content, usually in the form of text. It is pre-trained, so it starts with a data set and uses that to develop its responses and mechanisms for response. And it is a transformer. It transforms that text into some semantic meaning in its responses. And it does this using a neural network, which is based on our understanding of how the human brain works, where signals between neurons work together to produce an outcome. So this training allows GPT to produce human-like responses. In the past, this was done through things such as customer service chatbots, though those were not always the most human-like in their responses. It was easy to differentiate or to understand and recognize that those were not actually humans responding to you. GPT is often much closer in approximating human-like responses. I mentioned that this is a pre-trained system, and it uses primarily text data from the internet in order to build up its understanding of language patterns in terms of grammar and how humans would respond. This is limited in terms of the time frame. So ChatGPT 3, for example, only includes data up until 2021. So anything more recent than that wouldn't be included in its trained data. GPT in general works by having the human user type in some text, usually a question or some sort of query, and then the GPT system will look at that text and generate an appropriate output based on its understanding from the training data. And it's worked with a variety of questions. It can be a closed-ended question where it has a limited range of potential responses, as well as open-ended responses where it has a bit more flexibility or leeway in that regard. Now, as I mentioned, this is limited to the data set that was used during training, so it may not be able to respond to inquiries that were not in that initial data set for training. That data set may also be biased in terms of what responses you will get from the GPT, and it may also constrain how the GPT can respond to your inquiries. This requires users to be able to verify the answers to make sure that they are correct and applicable. And if a response is not pertinent or accurate, the user has to be able to continue iteratively ask questions in order to get the desired outcomes. So there are a variety of applications for GPT in general, some of which we'll be going over during this presentation. Perhaps the most popular are chatbots such as ChatGPT. GPT can, or AI in general, can also generate art or allow you to more rapidly edit art, images. There are applications in productivity, such as with Microsoft Office through Microsoft Copilot, which will be released in the near future, for software development with GitHub Copilot, and a variety of other applications as well. So as mentioned, ChatGPT is perhaps the most popular or commonly known GPT today. There's also Bing Chat, which is a Microsoft product which behaves in a similar manner. And this is what Bing Chat will look like. And so you have a text area where you can type in a question of some kind. So for example, if you wanted to create a lesson plan,
for the next generation science standards, right? I think a middle school lesson.
Yes.
Let's see what it does. So whenever using ChatGPT, it always takes a little while, right, to kind of figure out the text and then slowly start to build out. And you see it's typing slowly, right, which is building out the actual textual content in that way. And it stops here and there, right? So it's different than a regular search in most cases.
Yeah.
Wow, it's a pretty a lot of information in this lesson, right?
And then we can also see that there's some additional questions down here that we could then ask if we wanted to. Then there's also ChatGPT, which we could also ask the same question to that, just to compare the results that we would get. Here it's actually a little bit faster.
Mhm. Okay, looks like it finished the response there, the interesting part. So those two lessons look like they had, I think when I just eyeballed it, it looked like they had decent starter ideas, but it wasn't that in depth, was it?
Right, yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that one a little bit.
So again, if you type in a chat query, then you can produce some sort of output. So Dr. Ogawa and I work in the IDEA lab, instructional design and educational assessment. So if you want to create a logo for that lab,
So we're gonna create a logo with a light bulb and the text idea.
yes,
Okay.
the name of the lab.
Okay, so let's see what this does. So as you can see, AI takes a little bit of time, regardless of what version, what type of software you're using, right? It's not like an immediate result like a typical web search. So it does take a little bit of patience, and we can see what type of information it pulls up for actually giving us a logo. And we kind of always smile when we see it creating these. So Brandon, any comments? Is it missing anything there?
Well, missing or not entirely accurate.
Yeah, we have the AIDA lab here apparently, the AIDA lab and the IA lab.
Right.
I think you just reverse AI on the top left.
True. So,
But it has pretty good ideas in terms of how it should look. Where it's a good starting point for actually making art, isn't it?
yes, it's just now up to humans to take these ideas and then revise them to something that would work better for us.
Oh, cool.
AI can also be used for editing images, and here we have a short video clip to show that process.
So that's generative filling, right?
Yes, from Adobe.
Yeah, I think their video is not as generous. They could do a lot more with it because like my hair is receding a little bit right here. You can actually do generative fill to fill in some of that hair there for myself. Or if I want to give myself a mustache, I could do that one. It's pretty amazing.
This can also apply to a variety of other documents and files. So this is a demo of Microsoft Copilot, which works with Microsoft Office.
Wow, that's pretty crazy because now generative AI can actually scan your documents and actually produce more information from that, right?
Yes, so not just creating documents and responding to questions, but also performing some analyses as well.
Wow, really changes the game there.
And then the final thing with regards to programming.
GitHub Copilot is an AI pair programmer that we built to help you rediscover the joy and creativity of coding. By drawing context from comments and code, Copilot suggests individual lines and whole functions instantly. It's currently available as an extension for NeoVim, VS Code, Visual Studio, and the family of JetBrains IDEs. Copilot handles low-level tasks and common problems like scaffolding new code and APIs, building regular expressions, or even working in unfamiliar programming language. Copilot helps you stay in the flow by quickly offering a variety of suggestions, new paths, and ideas for new frameworks. This lets you spend less time on boilerplate and repetitive code patterns and more time building great software. Copilot works for all major programming languages and is intelligent enough to adapt to your personal style over time. It can even help you learn new programming languages. To learn more, check out this link. Now, if only Copilot could suggest a cool way to end this video. Oh, that's not bad. Ooh, Oh, that is the one right there.
Okay, wow. So Copilot is really making, I guess, a more optimized path to even development for programming, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, pretty interesting. We'll see how that impacts them in the future slide, though.
So we just showed a variety of ways that AI can be used in various fields. So we just went through creating code with GitHub Copilot, being able to follow variety of coding standards, languages. It can create content in various applications, some of which Dr. Ogawa is going to talk about momentarily. It can analyze data, generate content, not just text, but images as well. Just as a quick question, here we have two images that are illustrating what how GPT works. Both have some similarities between them, but just that as a question, which do you think an AI created?
Oh, almost down the middle.
Right, very close.
Okay, so why don't we stop the share since we know just under, there's a little bit more voted A, but just by a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a slight majority voting for A. And that is, in fact, the one that was generated by an AI generator. The other was created by a human. So this was created by Yofan Chai, one of our students at University of Iowa Manoa. And he designed this with the GPT as a resource in the cloud, and then humans who are connected to it through these lines. You'll note that these lines don't have arrows, and that's because it is a bidirectional or two-directional relationship. The humans provide the training data to the GPT and ask their questions to the GPT, and then the GPT provides its responses to the humans.
Okay, very cool. Thank you very much. Just a quick note, we got a couple of burning questions in the chat we're going to address really quickly. And one audience member asked, are these GPT applications free? In this case, the building one. Yes, the AI art generator we're going to cover in a little bit is actually free. That's the Bing Image Create. You can use that for free with an account with Microsoft, of course. Okay, so as Brandon started to allude to, how can we see a difference between these two? It's actually kind of hard to tell the difference between them, which is why it actually beat the Turing test in most cases. We don't know what's generated by humans or computers, and that's one of the major points.
At this point, Dr. Gao is going to talk about how we can actually apply this in practical terms.
Okay, so when we think about generative AI, we have to look at how it's impacting the world today. So what we want to start with is the global picture and the workforce. So with that in mind, here's a few job examples for us. Well, when we looked at a lot of the research, one article mentioned how about 92% of current programmers report using AI in their work, such as GitHub Copilot. So they're actually doing a lot of this generation with AI support. I have a security expert I'm really good friends with, and he's pretty big in the security world. I don't want to say his name just in case. I don't want to, put him out there in case he doesn't like this idea. But he mentioned that he uses ChatGPT to draft security policies for organizations and companies he works for. And the crazy thing is he said it's actually really good, and then he goes in and edits to make sure that it matches the company to what he wants it to be. So he uses it very well. Some attorneys have been using GPT sources to draft legal briefs. We'll go into that in more detail in a little bit. Some of you might know about this one. Professors use GPT to start parts of their work, whether it's publications, grants, feedback, that kind of thing. A lot of professors said, hey, can we optimize our work in different ways? A lot of media outlets started writing articles using a lot of GPT-based starting points. And in many cases, they're actually saying, can we change the job prospects by using AI to create more articles quicker? And also, people are using GPT to create more and more illustrations, right, and more imagery, which we're going to see some of the outcomes of this, because can it really take the place of human-generated art is a simple question that we all like to ask. Okay, and of course, we're seeing generative AI in post-production for a lot of media. So when we look at modern day issues like the current actors strike, that's one of the areas they're looking at, which is how much are actors paid for their likeliness, and if they're not paid for their acting, this becomes a major issue that we see today. Okay, so why don't we break this down in a little bit more detail, because we're seeing that it's complementing everyone's work. So here's an example of a job I found on ZipRecruiter. Okay, let's take a quick look at this job. They're looking for an AI content specialist to join their AI content team. They have an AI content team where they work with this program, Jasper AI, to generate blog posts on behalf of their clients. They're using it to create social media posts. Okay, so in this particular job, they're going to use AI to create posts, edit them, and post it for their clients. So they want candidates with strong, quote unquote, AI skills and strong written and editing skills. So with this in mind, they're looking at this to say, can we augment someone's work? So I have a question for everyone. How much do you think someone is paid for this job? So in this particular case, a majority went for the higher end payment structure here, right? Most said $22 an hour. In fact, this is actually only paying about $15 an hour. Depending on where we are, that's about how much you might get paid at McDonald's in some cases. When I drove past McDonald's, I saw the pay. I said, wow. Now this job is paying the same. I thought it would be a slightly higher end, but no, it is not a higher paying job. So is this changing the workforce in different ways? Yes. Are they getting paid more because of this? Not necessarily. They're getting paid to do more work. In one of the worst cases, I wish I grabbed a screenshot of this job before it came down. They actually said that they wanted people to evaluate articles on an average of 40 to 50 articles per week, and they were going to be paid for that as a full-time job. Can you imagine if you were an editor of AI content and you had to edit on average one article per hour? You got to be really in the zone to do that. That's why when we're seeing it change the workforce, it is really, really moving. Okay. So with this in mind, I want everyone here to start being critical of what's happening to the workforce and AI jobs. So start thinking about these two questions, because we're going to cover them. So first question is, what issues come up with these examples? Are there any issues that happen, or is it fine that we're using AI to support and do our jobs in some cases? And number two, what do these workplace examples have in common? How can we use this information based off of what we know about AI today? So first off, let's take a look at the issues. Number one, and working with a lot of our former students are programmers, right? And when they use generative AI to work with their actual projects, they said, sometimes generative AI takes them down the wrong path, and they actually basically go awry for like 3, 4, 5 hours. And it takes 3, 4, 5 hours to come back to where they left off. So they basically lose like a work day at times if they're not using this well. When we look at attorneys, we talked about lawyers using this for legal briefs. However, there is this one case study that came up about a month or two ago where a lawyer actually used ChatGPT to write his legal brief, submitted it, and what happened was the other side couldn't find any of the cases, only to learn that ChatGPT created a lot of fake cases that it referenced in his legal brief. So was this lawyer in hot water? Definitely. He looked pretty sweaty when the judge was talking to him. I'll leave it at that, right? You can imagine the rest. Okay, and next off, we have AI art contest. So at the Colorado State Fair, they had an AI art contest. And one individual submitted an AI art piece, and he called it an AI art piece. He said it was made with AI, and a lot of people accused him of cheating. It was really weird. He said what he did, and he was still accused of cheating. So that's a real issue, right, in terms of what is art. So when you look at it, this is what he submitted. It's called the Theater d'Opera Spatial, right? And he called it that by Jason with Midjourney. So he actually created this art piece. I think he works in the video game industry, and this looks really cool, looks really nice, which is why we can see why it could win this type of competition, right? So he used a mid-journey software for rendering. This one is not free to access. Right now, it's actually pay to access. I don't think they have a free trial anymore. Okay, but one of the modern issues that came up today, and really Brandon brought this to the attention of a lot of folks because he has a lot of access and works in cybersecurity in some instances, is the idea of fraud GPT. Fraud GPT is one of the quote-unquote newer generative pre-trained transformers available for, I guess, malicious use, because it can be used to develop malicious code, create undetectable malware, right? And also create other vulnerabilities like social engineering vulnerabilities where it can write really targeted spear phishing techniques to a wide range of people quickly. This is one that we're going to call vitally important because, as we all know recently, as Cheryl mentioned, we all feel horrible, and our well wishes go out to those in Maui with the wildfires and everything. But whenever there's things like natural disasters, a lot of folks in the, I'll call the, a lot of folks doing illegal actions in these areas really target natural disasters because there's a lot of scare and immediacy of need. So we can see fraud GPT going to be used in that particular case to try to make attacks because of these types of situations that come up. We want to highlight that, GPT is not always for the general good of things. We also see some of these things coming to fruition where fraud GPT is helping bad actors be even badder. Okay, but big picture, when we look at these examples in the workplace, what do these workplace examples have in common when they're used, what we call quote unquote well? When they're used well, what do they all do, right? So the commonality when used well is the following: people with a strong background augmenting their intelligence and workflow, not replacing it. When people have a strong background to begin with, they can amplify their outputs using AI to work on some of the things to help push them forward faster. So that's the critical item here. And this reminds me of a quote from a professor I worked with who fairly recently retired, Dennis Strebler. He mentioned to me, this was almost 15 years ago, he said, computers are intelligence augmenters. We need to learn to use technology to augment our abilities. This quote has not really changed with the course of time. When we're looking at generative AI, it does a lot of great things, but we need to use it in a way that augments our intelligence, right? And basically, when we have a strong background, we can use it in positive ways to really move forward faster and better. Okay? So one thing that we've been all commonly seeing is students and teachers using ChatGPT for a variety of things, right? So we're all in this field of education, and we love seeing students do well. Same time, we love helping to get there. But we know that students are using it for different purposes. So why don't we look at this and consider how GPT itself influences education as a big picture idea here. Okay, so the first set of questions asked whenever folks talk to Brandon and I about GPT, they always, especially in education, we always hear these questions, and these are some of the burning questions we got when you registered for this particular session, where it says, how many students are using generative AI, and how do we know that they are using it? So with that in mind, I'm going to try to answer these questions as best as possible. So many of you might know this online resource called Chegg, right? You all know Chegg? It's an online resource where students can go ahead and purchase access to tutorials or even submit their homework and ask folks to actually try to complete the homework so they can have a sample to refer to understand content. But as educators, we know at some level folks did purchase access to tutors to look at homework, to get homework to turn in. At what level, we don't know, we know it happened. However, when we're looking at resources like this, I like to think about it and let me tell you a story about what happened over the course of basically only a couple of years. So we know this company, we know what they do. So what I like to do is look at stock information, see how much a company is worth based on how they're performing. When we look at this particular chart, if you see in mid-2020, we all know what happened. We had a pandemic going on. At first, at the pandemic, we see the data dipping a little bit. And then what happened? Chegg's value skyrocketed from about $30 to $40 a share to just over $110 a share. So we know that they had a lot of customers, a lot of paying customers, they had a lot of employees and everything. This company was flourishing. Okay, let's fast forward into 2022, mid-late 2022, when ChatGPT was released. What happened to this particular company on the slides? What do you see? did their stock drop to like 30, 40 bucks. And it kept on going down to what we see today at about $10. Look at that. They went down below 10% of their valuation at their peak in the middle of the pandemic. So we can see by how much people are using different tools for different reasons and going between them. So ChatGPT, for example, had a definite impact. So we know that a good number of folks are using it. Do we have an exact number? Definitely not. But we know a good number is. That's the scary part. So when you ask how many people are doing it, this type of data supports what we are actually expecting today. Second question we consistently get is, how do we know if if students right they are using ChatGPT? Well, here's the kind of fun thing. According to fairly recent research, right, at the beginning of this year, right, this research team, I think out of Stanford, they looked at the idea of can you calculate and use math to determine the likeliness of someone using ChatGPT. So at this time, they were focusing on GPT-2, and they created what they call the Detect GPT model, and it has the algorithm on the left and the formula on the right. If you want to read it, we'll have the resource available to you. It's a very interesting paper, but highly, highly mathematical. Okay, so with this in mind, the big takeaway is that GPT-based text on GPT-2 basically watermarks itself. So the text itself is detectable because of its own watermark it creates. That means that it's likely to apply to GPT-3 and 4. However, this actually turned into what we call like a cat and mouse game, where every time there's a new version or a different rendition of what's being used, because not all generative AI is going to use GPT-3 or 4, for example, there's going to need to be another model to detect it. So currently, there's not a good model to detect all of it. Even if you ask it to detect it, it's not necessarily that good. It's not some writing that I did was GPT created, which is kind of scary. So if you're asking, can we detect it? It's not that straightforward, but it is technically feasible to do so, right? So research shows that it's definitely possible. Okay, but with that in mind, let's take a look at the big picture of how GPT or generative pre-trained transformers are impacting education. So in our subject field of computer science, on the big picture, a lot of folks are looking at what's happening because basically generative AI made it really easy to enter programming. You ask a prompt to program something for you, and it can create a program based off of your request. So this is scary because most of our projects at the lower levels are completable by just asking questions of ChatGPT. So with that in mind, a lot of scholars in computer science are debating, what are the core concepts students need to learn now with generative AI being so available? So there's a current focus on programming concepts and generation, right? That's what we're currently doing. Can students understand concepts and create programs? However, some of the future focus that a lot of people are thinking about is, can we focus on computational thinking and program comprehension and testing? So if they ask questions of it, can they comprehend a program it gives so they can edit it? And can they test the outputs to make sure it's doing the correct things? So if that becomes a new version of programming, we don't know yet, but that's possible. So if that is the case, then learning objectives and goals need to be modified. Even those in industry are highly concerned about this because they're worried if novices are creating programs and don't know exactly what they want, what's going to happen? Can they get worse programs? Can they get programs that don't work? Can they get programs that actually aren't secure? There's a lot of issues that come up with it that a lot of folks are worried about, both in academia and industry. So that's one subject area's big picture. This is actually happening in many subject areas today. I recently talked to someone in travel industry, and he said it's changing the world of travel industry completely in terms of how they work with customer service. Okay, and just recently, just yesterday, the University of Hawaii actually released their guidance on basically generative AI, where if you want to point to something, UH finally has something here out for it. So for those of you in K-12 schools, administrators, teachers, you want to look at different possible policies, you can look here for guidance as well. So they're first off looking at what we call a decentralized decision-making approach. They want each teacher at the university to think about the possibilities with GPT or generative pre-trained transformers and how it impacts their classroom. So they want instructors to teach the benefits, the limitations, and ethical considerations for their different classes. So there's no formal policy at all, but we do have some general guidance available here, which focuses on these major areas. They want us to educate students, right, on expectations, ethics, and limitations. They want us to leverage generative AI for tutoring, language learning, personalized recommendations, intelligent feedback, chatbots, and virtual assistants. They want us to leverage these things in the classroom where it can help students, but it means we also teach them how to use it. They also want us to create assessments for students that focus on critical thinking and tailoring work around case studies that pre-trained transformers would have difficulty answering, right? So they want us to look at open-ended thought and or open-ended prompts with original thought processes. So this is the general view of the University of Hawaii. If you want, we're gonna have these links available to check out, where you can actually look at what the full statement is. I just wanted to highlight it here for you today. One thing that's actually of a lot of benefit to folks is this following Google Doc. Brandon, could you please click the link for me? This Google Doc actually gives sample syllabi, icons, and text you can input if you want to use it in your classroom in different ways, where you have certain assignments, you might say do not use. Other ones that says you have light assistance with certain types of non-substantive tasks, anywhere to even actual different work with learning outcomes. All of these details are here, and you can even do in assignment specific versus in your general class specific. So this is really good guidance in getting started, but you might have to tailor it depending on your need. So nice heads up for everyone here that we have this type of guidance from the university that everyone here can kind of look at and kind of take and adjust to really help yourselves out. Okay, I'd be happy to answer questions about this in a bit, but it's interesting. This literally came out yesterday, which is why I got to thank Cheryl for planning this session the day after it was released. I don't know how she planned it so well. Okay, unless she asked AI to figure out the date, but that might be the case. Okay, so with that in mind, I want you to kind of see, I as a faculty member said, how did this really impact me, right? So I want to say, if I could use AI to augment my job, what could it do for me? Let me take you through a story of my life for a little bit of time. So first off, I asked Bing Chat to write portions of articles to help me get started, right? So we have to publish when we work at the university. I said, can it help me get started when I'm kind of getting to a roadblock? Okay, and then I said, well, I had to look around for guidance on how we can use that. And a lot of journals and conferences say that authors can use GPT to edit their work and not to do it for them. So I said, okay, well, let me just see what ideas I get from it. And you know what happened? I found out that trying to look at what GPT writes, incorporate it into how I write, and incorporate it into other texts I have takes way, way longer than just writing. And I enjoy writing way more. So this like tripled my work time for like no reason, which is crazy. Okay, I said, okay, can it even help with things like student feedback on work? So I took a sample one just to see how it would work out. And I might be a picky teacher, but when I was looking at the feedback Chat GPT gave, I said, oh, wow, it's pretty broad. It's pretty good feedback in terms of arrangement of things, but it was missing a lot of detail. So it took me like close to double, triple the time to actually write feedback to say, oh, take this, add other items I want, blend it together to give comprehensive feedback to the student. It didn't work out that well. So I guess in a sense, trying to augment myself really kind of pushed me backwards. However, when I asked Bing Chat to do a lesson plan for me on a new lesson I wanted to get started on, like looking at a new lesson for class, it actually gave me, I would call decent general points, as Brandon showcased earlier. Nothing substantial enough to just take to the classroom and use, of course, right? But decent enough to get me started, say, okay, I have ideas, let me go ahead and flesh it out and bring it to class and work on it. That's where it actually shined, was getting those ideas started where I didn't know where to start, okay? And of course, like a lot of folks, I was pretty sure some students submitted work that was created by ChatGPT because I teach an ethics class. A lot of times, the ChatGPT says it's complex and doesn't give you a real answer. So with that in mind, I was guessing that people did it. So I had to adjust how I actually taught my class, where I modified my writing assignments to include oral or presentation components, where students had to respond to a Q&A session to demonstrate their knowledge of their writing. And lo and behold, students had difficulty responding to certain types of detailed questions about their analyses. Like when I asked why they select theories, can you defend why I selected them, and how it differentiates between them. Those were areas students struggled with when I said, okay, so what did your reading say about it? And they didn't have much answers about that. And that's where it really played a role in my classroom. And I said, wow, maybe this oral component part and critical thinking really can help to determine how much of the writing was original, where the oral component was a part of the writing grade. So it's kind of funny because a lot of students said, oh, I felt like I was getting grilled, but I told them I was going to grill them. So I guess point came across very, very well. Okay. So in the classroom, a lot of folks believe, I think, a similar item, which is having GPT complete work for students, right? Doing work for them is not really acceptable, right? Most don't want students typing a prompt to submit an essay. That's just not acceptable. So with that in mind, we got to ask the question, how can we leverage GPT to improve learning? And this is where we want to go with things. So we got to think back to a couple slides ago when we said, what was a commonality when professionals used generative AI well? People with a strong background augment their intelligence and workflow, they don't replace it. So how can we use this knowledge and apply it to the classroom? That's a really good goal. So with this in mind, it comes down to one major core concept that we commonly see when Brandon and I talked about and worked on this. This is a major concept that is cross-cutting across all disciplines. Can information literacy be a core concept to GPT-based usage? So if teachers and students understand how GPT results work and they can check the accuracy, that becomes really critical for folks. So knowing how to use a tool and support their learning. So basically, here's a couple of questions. Do students know how to ask good questions for generative AI? Do they know how to revise their questions for generative AI to get better responses that they want? And can they take outputs and edit them for the needs they have? If they can do all those things, that becomes a really good use of creating a strong output, but also demonstrates a critical understanding of the content and how it's presented. So we bring that together, we can actually create an augmented intelligence for a lot of folks. So let me give you an example of instructional design, because we're in the instructional design and educational assessment laboratory, right? The IDEA lab. There's a lot of great examples. I want to give you one that a history teacher did, and this was like a most amazing example I've heard, which was a lot of history classes assign in college, assign students to write a paper about a historical event, basically critically analyzing it from multiple vantage points, right? So this professor said, I'm going to adapt it for ChatGPT to make sure students know things well and understand critical thinking. So he said he started by having students write their paper with ChatGPT, right? They actually had to write a paper with ChatGPT, and then he made the first assignment attached to that, have them review all the sources that ChatGPT came up with, and actually determine whether or not the sources are valid and reliable and contextually accurate. So they had to review the original source, read what the citation was in context to make sure it was a good reference. And then when they found the good content, they had to identify additional sources that could be beneficial and support their argumentative essay. So that was kind of amazing because they had to actually go ahead and find more sources that complemented the ones they already had, having a high level of information literacy for history. And at the end of the day, they had to write a paper combining all the sources. But for a lot of students, it became a lot easier because they had such a thorough knowledge of sources available. They could easily write that paper. So they had really good papers, a lot of original writing and thought, because they had a lot of good sources in mind right from the get-go. That's one of those amazing things we saw. I said, wow, when professors or teachers as a whole do things like this, we want to always commend them for it and say, this is some of those examples that I think can change a lot of folks' lives and change the way students learn. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much to Dr. Michael Brian Ogawa and Brandon Ogata for putting all this together. I think they're muted in there, but I just heard applause. I just heard amazing applause from the other room. It sounded like a BTS concert. So thank you to you both very much. We couldn't have done it without you, and I can't think of a better pair to walk us through the first steps of this.